Stand up right now and apologize to my son for your sabotage or clean out your desk. Charles Aldridge's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade, his finger pointing directly at me across the mahogany table. The 12 board members and senior staff sat in dead silence, waiting for my response. But all I could think about was my daughter Maria, 2,000 miles away, on the USS Gerald R. Ford, trusting that the FA-18 wing components we built here would keep her alive when she worked on those birds. That's when I decided to play the recording. My name is Tom Rodriguez. I'm 54 years old, and that moment proved my 26 years as Chief Operations Manager at Coastal Defense Systems meant nothing to the Aldridge family when their profits were on the line. So, let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started 10 months ago. Back then, I was running operations with a team of 14 solid engineers and technicians here in Norfolk, Virginia. We specialized in naval aviation manufacturing for defense contracts, and I knew every rivet, every specification, every safety protocol by heart. After serving 14 years as a Navy Chief Petty Officer and working my way up from the shop floor, I'd earned respect through actual work, not family connections. Then Charles hired his son, Brandon. First day on the job, Brandon rolled up in a brand new BMW X5, wearing a custom suit that cost more than most of my guys made in a month. He had an MBA from Stanford and exactly zero real-world naval aviation experience. According to Charles, Brandon was there to modernize our operations and bring innovative cost management to an aging workforce. Red flag number one. But I figured every boss's kid deserves a chance to prove themselves. Tom, you'll be mentoring Brandon, Charles announced during our department meeting. Show him our processes. He's got some fresh ideas about optimizing efficiency. Brandon's first fresh idea was cutting our materials, testing protocols by 50% to accelerate production schedules. When I explained that naval aviation contracts require specific safety certifications, he waved me off with that entitled attitude I'd seen in too many young officers who never spent time in the engine room. Look, Tom, I understand you're comfortable with traditional methods, but we need to embrace lean manufacturing principles. My father expects measurable improvements, not status quo thinking. That's when I realized we had a serious problem. This wasn't just nepotism. This was dangerous nepotism applied to carrier aircraft component manufacturing. Now, here's where things get personal. My daughter Maria is serving as an aviation mechanic on the USS Gerald R. Ford right now. She's the one who signs off on whether those FA-18s are safe to fly missions. So, when some MBA kid starts talking about cutting corners on aircraft parts, it's not just about business for me. It's about bringing my girl home alive. The real trouble started 2 months after Brandon joined when we landed the North Star, naval contract, worth $275 million over 4 years for carrier-based aircraft components. It was the biggest deal in our company's 28-year history. The contract specified manufacturing wing structural components using titanium grade 5 with specific heat treatment requirements and stress testing standards that had kept Navy pilots alive for decades. Brandon was assigned to lead the cost analysis phase of the contract preparation, while I handled technical specifications and safety compliance. His initial reports showed production costs that would save $22 million across the entire contract duration. When I questioned the numbers, he got defensive in that way privileged kids do when someone challenges their theories with real-world experience. Maybe you're not seeing the optimization opportunities here, Tom. I've identified several process improvements that could increase our profit margins by 8% while maintaining all required quality standards. So I took his cost analysis report home that night and went through it line by line with the same attention to detail I'd learned maintaining aircraft systems in the Navy. What I found made my blood run cold. Brandon had systematically replaced titanium grade 5 specifications with aluminum 6261, eliminated critical heat treatment cycles, and reduced stress testing from 3 samples per batch to 1 sample per production run. These weren't optimizations, they were fundamental alterations that would produce wing components 65% weaker than contract requirements. In the salt air environment of carrier operations, those aluminum components would corrode and fail within months instead of lasting decades like proper titanium. Brandon, these changes violate basic metallurgy principles, I told him the next morning. Aluminum alloy can't provide the stress resistance that titanium delivers in carrier environments. Plus, saltwater corrosion will eat through aluminum components in 6 months. Pilots will die if this equipment fails during flight operations. That's your interpretation, Mike. My analysis shows aluminum can meet performance requirements at significant cost savings. My father agrees we need to think strategically about profit margins in this competitive market. I scheduled an emergency meeting with Charles that afternoon. Tom, I appreciate your concerns, but Brandon has identified legitimate opportunities for improvement. His cost projections show we can increase profit margins significantly while meeting all federal technical specifications. I spread the engineering reports across his mahogany desk, pointing to the specific changes that would compromise equipment integrity. Charles, these aren't improvements. These are material substitutions that will fail Navy inspection and violate federal contract terms. We'll face criminal fraud charges if we submit equipment that doesn't match approved specifications. Charles leaned back in his expensive leather chair with the confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about consequences. I think you're being overly conservative, Tom. Brandon has advanced business training from one of the top MBA programs in the country. He understands strategic optimization better than traditional engineering approaches. Look, Charles, I don't care what school he went to or how much that degree cost. Aluminum melts at 1220 degrees while titanium maintains structural integrity until 3000 degrees. The tensile strength of grade 5 titanium is 130,000 psi. Aluminum 6061 tops out at 45,000 psi. No MBA program changes basic physics or the laws of metallurgy. Charles's expression hardened into the cold stare of a man who wasn't used to being challenged by his employees. Tom, I'm going to say this once. Brandon represents the future direction of this company. If you can't adapt to new methodologies, then perhaps it's time to consider whether you're the right fit for our evolving organization. The threat was crystal clear. Accept Brandon's dangerous modifications or find another job. But Charles had miscalculated. You don't survive 14 years in the Navy and 26 years in defense contracting without learning how to fight battles that matter. And this one mattered more than most. Over the following 3 months, things escalated rapidly. Brandon started attending my engineering meetings uninvited, contradicting my technical decisions with cost-saving alternatives that sounded impressive to people who'd never worked with actual aircraft. He'd send emails to our Pentagon procurement contacts with revised specifications, copying me as if I'd approved the changes. When federal inspectors asked technical questions during site visits, Brandon would defer to me with a smile, then later blame any confusion on my unclear communication style. The kid was setting me up, and he was learning fast from his old man. 3 of my best engineers, Tony Castellano, James Martinez, and Paul Manning, requested transfers to other departments. These weren't guys who scared easily. Tony was a former Navy machinist like me, James had 15 years with Lockheed before joining us, and Paul had worked on the original FA-18 development program. But Brandon had made it clear that association with resistant personnel would impact their career advancement opportunities at Coastal Defense Systems. My team shrank from 14 engineers to 11, while Brandon's influence expanded throughout the organization. Charles made sure everyone knew his son was being groomed for leadership, and smart people started paying attention to which way the wind was blowing. The breaking point came during preparation for the major Navy compliance review scheduled for November 15th. This wasn't just a routine inspection. The Navy was conducting comprehensive audits of all major contractors after some quality issues with another supplier had caused a carrier to lose 2 aircraft in the Persian Gulf. They weren't taking chances with safety anymore. I'd spent 2 weeks documenting why Brandon's material. Substitutions would compromise safety and violate contract specifications. Every calculation, every stress analysis, every corrosion study pointed to the same conclusion. Aluminum components would fail catastrophically in carrier environments, probably within the first year of deployment. The night before our presentation, I was working late in my office when I heard voices from the main conference room down the hall. Charles and Brandon were supposed to be at some corporate dinner, but there they were, going over tomorrow's strategy. Dad, what happens if the Navy asks technical questions I can't answer tomorrow? Don't worry, Brandon. I've already briefed the procurement team that Tom has been resistant to efficiency improvements. If there are any technical issues during the presentation, we'll frame them as his failure to provide adequate documentation support. I stopped outside the conference room door and quietly activated my phone's recording function. After 26 years dealing with corporate politics, I'd learned to always have backup plans. But what if they want to see the original engineering specifications? Brandon's voice carried that nervous edge you hear in young officers before their first real mission. Brandon's original specifications reflect outdated, overly conservative approaches that would make us non-competitive in the current market. Your analysis demonstrates we can meet all critical requirements while improving profitability. Trust me, after tomorrow's presentation, you'll be leading this entire department. That conversation changed everything. This wasn't incompetence or even standard corporate nepotism. This was deliberate fraud, and they were planning to destroy my career to cover their tracks. But I'd been in tougher spots during my Navy years, and I knew the value of good intelligence before engaging the enemy. I started documenting everything the next morning, every email, every meeting, every conversation. I kept backup copies of all original engineering reports and compared them with Brandon's modified versions. The differences were staggering. He'd systematically altered specifications across 19 different contract items, eliminated crucial safety tests, and reduced inspection requirements that had been developed through decades of hard-learned lessons. The most dangerous change involved the wing structural components. My original specifications called for titanium grade 5 with Rockwell hardness of 2832 HRC after proper heat treatment cycles. Brandon's aluminum substitutions would provide approximately 65% less stress resistance than required titanium components. In carrier operations, where aircraft experience extreme stress from catapult launches and arrested landings, those aluminum parts would crack and fail. Pilots would die if this equipment failed during flight operations, including potentially my daughter Maria. But I needed more than technical documentation. I needed proof of criminal intent and allies who understood what was really happening. That's when Tony Castellano approached me with information that made the situation much more serious than simple fraud. "Tom, we need to talk. Not here at the office. Can you meet me at Murphy's Diner on Route 64 tonight at 8? Murphy's was a 24-hour truck stop about 15 miles from the office, the kind of place where defense contractors and Navy personnel grabbed coffee before heading to the shipyard for early morning shifts. Tony was already there when I arrived, sitting in a back corner booth with a folder and the kind of concerned expression I remembered from briefings before dangerous missions. "We have a serious problem," he said without preamble, sliding the folder across the table. "Charles has been monitoring your computer activity, your emails, your phone calls from the office. He's been building a surveillance file on you for the past 2 months." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop. Activity logs showing every document I'd accessed, every email I'd sent, every phone call I'd made from my office extension, all logged, tracked, and analyzed. How is this legal? Technically, company equipment allows for monitoring, but here's the concerning part. Tony turned to another page showing a directory of audio files organized by date and participant names. Jessica Aldridge has been recording conversations throughout the building, not just casual workplace discussions, but formal meetings, private phone calls, confidential discussions with other employees. My name appeared in dozens of entries. "This goes beyond normal corporate surveillance," Tony continued, his voice dropping to the level we'd used during classified briefings back in our Navy days. "Jessica's been systematically collecting information on anyone Charles considers a potential threat, including Admiral Patricia Hendricks, our primary board member. What kind of information on Patricia? Financial records, private communications, details about her Navy pension. Charles has been building leverage files on the entire board of directors." I stared at the surveillance data spread across the diner table. This wasn't just nepotism or fraud. This was systematic corporate espionage designed to maintain control through blackmail and intimidation. The kind of operation that would make federal prosecutors very interested. "Tony, why are you showing me this? Because you're not the first target. Over the past 3 years, Charles has systematically pushed out 4 other senior managers who questioned his decisions. He replaces experienced personnel with family loyalists, then uses surveillance data to control anyone who objects to his methods. What happened to the other managers? Thomas Anderson from Quality Control was forced out after Charles discovered personal financial problems and threatened to report them to federal security clearance authorities. Lisa Martinez from Procurement quit after Jessica recorded her complaining about Brandon's inexperience. Then, Charles threatened to sue her for creating a hostile work environment. Tony closed the folder with the decisive motion of someone who'd made up his mind. Charles doesn't just fire people who oppose him. He destroys their careers and ensures they can't find work elsewhere in the aerospace industry. But this time, he's made a mistake. What do you mean? Admiral Patricia Hendricks. She's not just our biggest board member. She's a former Navy procurement officer with 18 years' experience in defense contract oversight. More importantly, she maintains active security clearances and ongoing relationships throughout the Pentagon procurement system. Patricia has been asking questions about our recent performance metrics. She's noticed discrepancies between reported costs and actual deliverables. I think she suspects something is wrong, but she doesn't have concrete evidence. Can you arrange a meeting? Already done. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Riverside Coffee downtown. She thinks you're briefing her on technical specifications for her quarterly investment review. Admiral Patricia Hendricks wasn't what I expected when I met her the next afternoon. At 57, she looked more like a retired college professor than a major aerospace industry board member. But when she studied my engineering documentation at Riverside Coffee, her questions revealed the sharp analytical mind of someone who understood both Pentagon procurement procedures and corporate fraud. Tom, these material substitutions aren't just cost-cutting measures. They're systematic contract violations that could result in federal criminal charges. She compared Brandon's modified specifications with my original reports, making notes on a legal pad with the precision of someone who'd reviewed thousands of defense contracts during her career. If these altered specifications were submitted to Navy procurement, we're looking at conspiracy to defraud the government. The penalties for defense contractor fraud can include up to 20 years in federal prison. Charles believes he can control any investigation through surveillance and pressure tactics. He's miscalculated badly. Patricia pulled out her own folder and showed me financial analysis charts that made my blood run cold. I maintain active relationships throughout Pentagon procurement. More importantly, I've been monitoring concerning trends in this company's performance metrics for the past 6 months. She handed me a detailed breakdown of our recent contracts. Delivery schedules have slipped 23% since Brandon joined the organization. Quality control reports show increasing deviation from contract specifications across multiple programs. Most troubling, our profit margins have increased dramatically, while our actual material costs should be rising due to inflation. You think Charles has been manipulating financial reports beyond just the North Star contract? I think this fraud extends much deeper than material substitutions on a single contract. She pointed to specific numbers that showed impossible cost reductions. These efficiency improvements supposedly saved $22 million across 6 different Pentagon contracts over the past 8 months. That level of cost reduction is impossible without compromising quality or violating safety specifications. The numbers were damning. No legitimate engineering improvements could generate those savings without fundamental changes to materials, processes, or safety protocols that would require extensive testing and federal approval. Patricia, what do you need from me? Complete documentation of all specification changes, recorded evidence of criminal intent, and testimony from other employees who've witnessed this fraud. Can you provide those? I have recorded conversations between Charles and Brandon, planning to blame me for their specification violations. Tony has documented their surveillance operation and can testify about the pattern of forcing out competent managers. But we'll need more than just our word against theirs. Leave that to me. I have contacts who can arrange for an unannounced Navy compliance audit. But we need to be prepared for Charles's counterattack when he realizes what's happening. That's when Patricia explained Charles's leverage strategy in detail. He'd been collecting compromising information on board members, investors, and senior staff for years. Financial difficulties, personal problems, professional disputes, anything that could be used for blackmail or character assassination. He has files on everyone, including me, financial records from my divorce settlement, details about my consulting contracts with other defense firms, even personal communications with Pentagon contacts. Charles is prepared to destroy anyone who threatens his operation. Then, how do we stop him? We get federal authorities involved before he can deploy his blackmail files. Once criminal investigators start asking questions, Charles's leverage becomes worthless. He can't blackmail federal agents or intimidate DCIS investigators. Patricia's plan was straightforward, but required precise timing. She'd contact her Pentagon procurement contacts and request an immediate compliance audit of the North Star contract. Federal investigators would discover the specification violations and demand explanations. When Charles tried to blame me, we'd present evidence that destroyed their credibility completely. The timing was critical. Charles planned to announce Brandon's promotion to Chief Engineering Officer at next Tuesday's board meeting. That's when he'd also announce my reassignment to advisory status, which was corporate speak for forced retirement with reduced benefits. Let him make his move. Let Brandon present his fraudulent specifications in front of the entire board and our federal auditors. Then we'll present evidence that destroys their credibility completely and puts them in federal prison where they belong. I spent the weekend preparing for what would either be vindication or the end of my career. Tony provided copies of all surveillance logs and audio recordings Jessica had collected illegally. I compiled side-by-side comparisons of original specifications versus Brandon's modifications for all 19 affected contract items. Most damaging was the recording of Charles and Brandon planning to frame me for their specification violations. Monday morning arrived with unusual tension in the air. Charles seemed unusually confident, spending the day meeting privately with board members and presumably building support for Brandon's promotion. Jessica shadowed me constantly, attending meetings I hadn't invited her to, and taking notes on every conversation. Around 3 p.m., Jessica approached me with her practiced fake smile. "Tom, my grandfather wants to see you in his office. He mentioned something about finalizing transition plans for tomorrow's announcement." I walked into Charles's office to find him sitting with Brandon and a man I didn't recognize wearing a DCIS identification badge. "Tom, this is Inspector Williams from Defense Criminal Investigative Service. He has some questions about our North Star contract specifications." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't part of Patricia's plan. The audit wasn't supposed to start until after Tuesday's board meeting. Inspector Williams pulled out a folder containing documents I recognized immediately. "Mr. Rodriguez, we've received reports of potential specification irregularities in your North Star contract submissions. Several items don't match our original procurement requirements. Can you explain these discrepancies?" I looked at the documents spread across Charles's desk. They were Brandon's modified specifications with my name listed as the reviewing engineer. "Inspector, I never approved these specifications. These modifications violate both Navy safety standards and federal contract requirements." Brandon jumped in immediately with rehearsed confidence. "Tom, we discussed these efficiency improvements in multiple engineering review meetings over the past several months. You signed off on all optimization measures after thorough analysis. That's completely false. I specifically documented why these modifications would compromise equipment integrity and pilot safety." Charles leaned forward with practiced concern. "Inspector Williams, I believe we have a serious communication breakdown here. Tom has been resistant to modernization efforts, and there seems to be confusion about which specifications represent our official engineering position." Inspector Williams looked between us carefully. "Who has final authority over engineering specifications in this company?" "Tom is our Chief Operations Manager," Charles said smoothly. "All technical decisions require his approval and signature. Perfect trap. Either I accepted responsibility for Brandon's dangerous modifications, or I appeared incompetent before a federal inspector." Charles thought he'd cornered me completely. But I'd spent 14 years learning how to handle pressure in situations where lives depended on making the right decisions. "Inspector Williams, I'd like to request a formal review of all engineering documentation. I believe there have been unauthorized changes to approved specifications, and I have evidence that proves systematic fraud." Charles's expression flickered for just a moment. "Tom, I don't think that's necessary. We can resolve any misunderstandings internally through proper management channels." "Actually," Inspector Williams said, "given the nature of these contracts and the seriousness of these allegations, a formal review is exactly what federal regulations require." That's when I pulled out my phone and connected it to the conference room speakers. Charles's voice filled the room. Don't worry, Brandon. I've already briefed them that Tom has been resistant to efficiency improvements. If there are technical issues, we'll frame them as his failure to provide adequate support. Then Brandon's unmistakable voice. What if they want to see the original specifications? There are no original specifications. Tom's analysis was incomplete and overly conservative. Your cost optimization study represents our official engineering position. The room went completely silent. Charles stared at me with barely controlled rage while Brandon's face went pale. Those recordings are illegal and taken out of context, Charles said, his composure finally cracking. No, said a voice from the doorway. They're evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Inspector Williams stepped aside as 2 additional federal agents entered the room. We've completed our preliminary review of all documentation. Mr. Charles Aldridge, Mr. Brandon Aldridge, and Ms. Jessica Aldridge, you're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government. What happened next was swift and decisive. Federal agents secured all company computers and phones while reading the Aldridge family their rights. Charles and Brandon were handcuffed and escorted out in front of the entire office staff. Jessica collapsed in her chair, finally understanding that family connections couldn't protect her from federal prosecutors. The charges were serious: conspiracy to defraud the government, falsifying federal contract specifications, and violations of the False Claims Act. The potential penalties included up to 20 years in federal prison and millions in fines. Admiral Patricia approached me as the agents finished collecting evidence. The board will need immediate leadership for the engineering department. Are you interested in the position you should have had years ago? That evening, I made the most important phone call of my life. Dad? Maria's voice came through clearly, despite the satellite connection from the carrier. Hey, sweetheart. I wanted to let you know that the wing components you've been working on are going to be built right from now on. No more shortcuts, no more corner cutting. What do you mean? People here were trying to save money by using cheaper materials that would have failed in carrier operations. We stopped them today. Federal agents arrested them for fraud. There was a long pause. Dad, are you saying you potentially saved lives today? I'm saying I made sure my daughter and every other pilot out there can trust the equipment we build. That's what matters most. Thanks, Dad. I love you. 3 months later, I'm sitting in what used to be Charles's office as Senior Vice President of Engineering Operations. The North Star contract was renegotiated with proper materials and realistic safety margins. Our engineering team expanded from 11 to 19 engineers, all hired based on competence and integrity. Charles pled guilty to federal fraud charges and received 6 years in federal prison plus $8.5 million in fines. Brandon was banned from government contracting permanently. Jessica lost her security clearance and accepted probation in exchange for cooperation. Most importantly, we established a veteran preference hiring policy and implemented comprehensive worker protection protocols. No one can intimidate employees for doing the right thing anymore. Every time I sign off on a specification now, I think about Maria working on those FA-18s. The parts we build here might be the difference between her aircraft making it back to the carrier, safely or not. That's my story. Tom Rodriguez, Senior Vice President of Engineering Operations, Coastal Defense Systems. Still here, still fighting for quality over shortcuts, still making sure our equipment works when it matters most. Some lessons are worth the fight.